My fiancé called our relationship suffocating to his ex, so I finally let him breathe. I've always dated men who couldn't handle my OCD. So when Marcus approached me at my cousin's engagement party in downtown Chicago, carefully straightening his tie while telling me about his meticulously organized Tesla and his scheduled spontaneous weekend adventures, I actually felt butterflies for the first time in years. Finally, someone who'd understand why I check my apartment door lock exactly 7 times before bed, who wouldn't roll their eyes at my color-coordinated closet, who might even wait patiently while I spent 4 to 5 minutes ensuring my makeup was absolutely perfect before our dinner dates at fancy Michigan Avenue restaurants. Spoiler alert, that precision was purely for show. The first year felt like a fairy tale. Marcus would help me reorganize my kitchen spices, wait without complaint during my checking routines, and hold my hand through the worst anxiety episodes. Sure, sometimes he'd gently suggest, "Katie, you don't really need to wash your hands 7 times, or hint that maybe seeing a therapist at Northwestern Memorial might help. But I figured he was looking out for me. After all, I couldn't expect someone to accept all my quirks without at least trying to better myself. When we decided to move into his Lincoln Park condo together, he even let me rearrange his bookshelf by height and genre, though I noticed his smile seemed increasingly strained. He'd watch me align his coffee table books with this patient expression that somehow felt less genuine each time. Marcus worked as a financial advisor at a prestigious firm downtown, and I was a graphic designer for a boutique agency in River North. Our lives seemed to fit together perfectly on paper, 2 successful professionals who appreciated order and planning. His friends called us the power couple, and my mother was already picking out grandmother names. But looking back now, I can see the cracks that were forming even then. The way he'd pause just a beat too long when I'd ask him to help me check if the stove was really off. How his jaw would tighten slightly when I'd need to restart our Netflix show because I'd missed the first few minutes while arranging the throw pillows just right. I told myself these were normal adjustments. Every couple has to compromise, right? And Marcus seemed so patient, so understanding compared to my ex-boyfriends who'd accused me of being high maintenance or crazy. He used clinical terms like anxiety management and behavioral patterns, which felt so much more respectful than the crude names I'd been called before. If only I'd realized that his patience wasn't love, it was research. He was studying me like one of his investment portfolios, calculating exactly how much dysfunction he could tolerate before the returns stopped being worth the risk. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how year 2 changed everything. Year 2, the mask began slipping. Marcus started deliberately leaving things askew, his coffee mug placed diagonally on the coaster, his dress shirts hung backwards in the closet, towels folded but stacked unevenly in the linen cabinet. Then he'd watch me with this unreadable expression as I compulsively fixed everything, like I was a lab rat he was observing for some twisted psychology experiment. You know that's not normal behavior, right? Like, clinically speaking, he'd say in this detached tone that made my skin crawl. Not concerned. Not loving. Clinical. The worst part was how he'd time my routines out loud like some cruel stopwatch. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, as I checked the front door lock. Really, Katie? We're at 6 minutes now for the stove. His voice carried this barely concealed irritation that made my chest tighten with shame. He started inviting his Northwestern business school buddies over with just 2 hours' notice, knowing I needed at least 3 days to mentally prepare and deep clean the condo. I'd be frantically scrubbing baseboards and reorganizing throw pillows while he'd tell his friends, "She's having one of her episodes," like I was some unstable roommate he had to manage. The dinner parties were the worst. I'd spend hours preparing, making sure every wine glass was spotless, every appetizer arranged perfectly on our Pottery Barn serving platters, every conversation topic researched so I wouldn't embarrass him. But no matter how hard I tried, he'd find something to criticize afterward. "Did you really need to rearrange the cheese board 3 times while Jake was talking about his promotion?" he'd ask while loosening his Brooks Brothers tie. "It's just a lot, Katie. My colleagues' wives don't do that kind of thing." His colleagues' wives. Like I was some defective model he'd accidentally purchased. The gaslighting was so subtle I almost missed it. He'd move my carefully organized makeup brushes and then act confused when I'd panic looking for them. "Are you sure you put them there, babe? Maybe you're just stressed about work." He'd schedule our dinner reservations at a Linear or Girl and Goat for times he knew would make me anxious, 8:30 p.m. when I preferred 6 p.m., or tables by the kitchen when he knew I needed to sit facing the exit. When I'd have panic attacks about these small changes, he'd sigh dramatically and say things like, "God, you're exhausting sometimes, Katie. It's just dinner." But the real kicker was how he'd weaponize my need for order. He'd accidentally mix up my color-coordinated closet as a joke, or rearrange my spice rack to be helpful and then act hurt when I'd spend hours fixing it. "Life isn't supposed to be a museum display, Katie," he'd say while I frantically reorganized my alphabetized tea collection. "Sometimes you need to just live." Then Marcus started mentioning Sophia. It started innocuously enough during our Sunday brunch at Fiancé in Lincoln Park. "Sophia never stressed about stuff like this," he'd say when I'd spend 10 minutes arranging our table setting just right. "She was just easygoing, you know?" Sophia had been his college girlfriend at University of Illinois. They dated for 3 years before she moved to Denver for some tech job. According to Marcus, she was spontaneous and low maintenance, everything I apparently wasn't. "Remember how you used to be more relaxed when we first started dating?" he'd ask while I organized our shared Google Calendar. Sophia was always up for last-minute adventures. We'd just hop in the car and drive to Wisconsin for the weekend without planning anything. The comparisons became a daily occurrence. Sophia never needed 45 minutes to get ready. Sophia didn't care if the restaurant changed their reservation time. Sophia didn't have episodes about wedding planning. Oh yes, we were planning our wedding. Marcus had proposed the previous Christmas at the Chicago Botanic Garden, a perfectly orchestrated moment that I'd later realize he'd probably run past Sophia first for approval. The ring was gorgeous, a 2-carat princess cut from Tiffany that he'd somehow managed to choose without any input from me. "I wanted it to be a surprise," he'd said, but now I wondered if he'd gotten advice from someone who actually knew what I liked. Wedding planning brought out the absolute worst in both of us. I needed the seating chart to be perfectly balanced, equal numbers at each table, compatible personalities grouped together, family drama strategically separated. When I'd spend hours working on the guest list spreadsheet, color-coding dietary restrictions and +1 statuses, Marcus would watch me with barely concealed disdain. "This is supposed to be fun, Katie," he'd say while I hyperventilated over whether the centerpieces should be white roses or peonies. "Sophia always said weddings should be about love, not logistics." The breaking point came during a cake tasting at Alliance Bakery in Roscoe Village. I'd scheduled 3 appointments, researched their entire portfolio, and prepared a detailed questionnaire about flavors and frosting options. Marcus showed up 20 minutes late, scrolling through his phone while I tried to make decisions. "Can't you just pick the chocolate one and move on?" he snapped when I asked the baker about the difference between Swiss meringue and American buttercream. "You're making this way more complicated than it needs to be." That's when his phone buzzed with a text notification. Sophia's name flashed across the screen for just a split second before he quickly flipped it face down. "Who was that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Just work stuff," he lied, but his ears turned red the way they always did when he wasn't telling the truth. That night, the seed of suspicion was planted. For weeks, that nagging doubt gnawed at me like a splinter I couldn't reach. Marcus became increasingly secretive with his phone, keeping it face down during dinner, taking calls in the other room, even sleeping with it under his pillow instead of on the nightstand charger where it used to live. His behavior grew more erratic too. He'd disappear for hours claiming he was running errands, but come home empty-handed. He'd mention inside jokes that I wasn't part of, then claim he couldn't remember where he'd heard them. Most tellingly, his criticism of my OCD intensified to the point of cruelty. "You know what your problem is, Katie," he said one evening while I organized our mail into neat piles: bills, personal correspondence, junk mail, magazines. "You're so busy controlling everything around you that you can't just be present in your own life. It's suffocating." That word hit me like a slap. Suffocating. 2 weeks before our wedding at the Chicago History Museum, I was in our home office addressing invitations. Each envelope had to be perfect, the calligraphy aligned just so, the vintage stamps positioned at precisely the same angle, the return address labels straight as rulers. It was meditative work that helped calm my pre-wedding anxiety. That's when Marcus's iPhone buzzed on the desk beside me. Sophia's name lit up the screen with a preview of her message. "How's the wedding planning going? You hanging in there?" Smiling face. My heart stopped. I stared at that phone for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Marcus was in the shower. I could hear the water running and his off-key singing of some Dave Matthews song. His passcode was still his birthday, the 15th of October '87. The idiot never was good with details, despite all his lectures about my attention to minutiae. My hands shook as I opened his messages, but what I found wasn't in his regular text app. Hidden in some encrypted messaging service I'd never heard of called Signal were months of conversations with Sophia. I scrolled back through weeks of daily exchanges. Good morning texts. Photos of her lunch. Complaints about her Denver dating life. And Marcus responding like some lovesick teenager, sending pictures of his morning coffee, sharing inside jokes, even asking for advice about handling me. The conversation from 3 days earlier made my stomach drop into my shoes. Sophia, how's the wedding planning going? Does Katie ever just relax and let things happen naturally? Marcus, LOL. No, never. It's honestly suffocating sometimes. She needs to control every tiny detail or she has a complete meltdown. That's why I need you to talk to. You get me? Sophia, I miss our spontaneous adventures. Remember when we drove to Lake Geneva without any reservations and just figured it out? Marcus, God, yes. Those were the days. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you hadn't moved to Denver. I sat there on our hardwood floor, surrounded by 200 half-addressed wedding invitations, reading about how my fiancé found our relationship suffocating. That word echoed in my head all night. Suffocating. He needed Sophia because I was suffocating him with my love, my care, my attention to the details that would make our wedding perfect. Fine. Let me show him what gasping for air really feels like. The next morning, I woke Marcus with his favorite intelligentsia coffee and my brightest fake smile. I'd spent hours perfecting my performance, practicing in the bathroom mirror until my expression looked genuinely enlightened rather than homicidal. Honey, I've been thinking, I said, perching on the edge of our bed like some reformed control freak having a breakthrough moment. I'm getting way too intense about this wedding planning. I need to step back and let you take the lead. His coffee mug paused halfway to his lips. Wait, what? I launched into my carefully rehearsed speech about how I'd been reading articles about wedding stress and realized I was being unfair to him. How he deserved to have input on our special day. How I'd been suffocating his creativity with my rigid planning style. I'm done micromanaging everything, I continued, watching his face cycle through confusion, relief, and then something that looked dangerously close to excitement. From now on, you handle all the vendor communications. I promise I won't bother you with a single question or suggestion. His face lit up like a kid on Christmas morning. Really? You mean it? Absolutely, I lied smoothly. I want you to feel empowered in this process. After all, it's your wedding too. What Marcus didn't know was that I'd already spent the previous sleepless night systematically transferring every single vendor contract to his email address and changing all the contact phone numbers to his cell. The caterer, florist, DJ, photographer, cake decorator, rental company, transportation service. Everyone now had explicit instructions that Marcus Richardson was the primary contact and decision-maker for the Richardson-Chen wedding. I'd also sent carefully worded emails to both our mothers explaining that Marcus had expressed feeling left out of the planning process and really wanted to take charge of the final details. Wasn't it sweet how much he wanted to contribute? How important this was to him. They should direct all questions, concerns, and vendor communications directly to him. His ego wouldn't let him admit he was drowning, even when the waves started crashing over his head. Within 24 hours, his phone started ringing. The caterer called during his important client meeting at the merchandise mart to confirm the final headcount. Marcus, caught off guard and panicked, guessed 150 guests. We'd actually invited 203 people, and 197 had RSVP'd yes. The florist needed immediate confirmation on centerpieces. The purple ones, he stammered, apparently forgetting we'd chosen white roses and eucalyptus specifically to match my grandmother's vintage lace table runners. The avalanche had begun, and I had front-row seats to watch my fiancé suffocate under the weight of his own incompetence. Watching Marcus drown in wedding planning details was like watching a slow-motion car crash, horrifying, but impossible to look away from. By day 3, his phone was ringing constantly. The DJ needed the Do Not playlist that I'd spent weeks curating based on family feuds and religious preferences. Marcus, who'd apparently never considered that his Catholic grandmother might not want to hear WAP at the reception, gave them permission to just play crowd favorites. The photographer called wanting the detailed family photo list I'd created to navigate our complex web of divorced parents, step-siblings, and relatives who weren't speaking to each other. Just take pictures of everyone. Marcus suggested helplessly, clearly having no idea that his Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia had been embroiled in a bitter property dispute for 15 years. The bakery needed him to come in for the final cake tasting he'd completely forgotten about. When he showed up 3 days late, they'd already started working on someone else's order and had to squeeze him in during their lunch break. Every evening, I'd come home to find Marcus at our dining table, surrounded by scattered papers, his laptop open to 17 different tabs, frantically trying to create spreadsheets that made no sense. Color-coded chaos that would have made my OCD brain weep if I hadn't been too busy filing my nails and watching him implode. "Katie, can you just help me with," he'd start to ask, desperation creeping into his voice. "Oh honey," I'd interrupt with saccharine sweetness, "I wouldn't want to suffocate you with my input. You're doing such a great job taking charge." His eye would twitch, but his pride wouldn't let him admit defeat. The breaking point came at 2 a.m. exactly 1 week before the wedding. I found Marcus passed out on our couch, still clutching his phone, surrounded by vendor contracts and a half-eaten container of leftover Thai food from sticky rice. His laptop was open to a frantic signal message he'd been typing to Sophia. "This is insane. I can't handle all these decisions. The caterer is threatening to cancel because I gave them the wrong head count. The florist says the purple flowers I ordered don't exist. And the photographer wants a shot list that apparently requires a PhD in family psychology. Maybe we should just call off the..." He'd passed out before finishing the sentence, but I knew exactly what he'd been about to type. Perfect. I beat him to it. The morning of our wedding at the Chicago History Museum, I woke up before dawn to get ready. Hair appointment at 6 a.m., makeup at 8, final dress fitting at 10. I looked absolutely radiant, every detail perfect, every curl in place, every pearl on my cathedral-length veil positioned exactly where it should be. Meanwhile, Marcus looked like he'd been hit by a CTA bus. The Chicago History Museum looked stunning that October afternoon. Golden light streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the carefully arranged white roses and eucalyptus that I'd originally chosen. Somehow, miraculously, most of the vendors had managed to salvage Marcus's catastrophic planning attempts. Probably because I'd been secretly coordinating with them all week, playing the role of concerned maid of honor, helping to fix the poor groom's mistakes. I glided down the aisle to Pachelbel's Cannon, my custom Vera Wang gown flowing behind me like silk water. Every step was measured, every breath controlled. I looked like a bride from the pages of Martha Stewart weddings. Marcus stood at the altar looking like he'd spent the night in a blender. His tuxedo was wrinkled and damp with sweat, his hair disheveled despite what was clearly a panicked attempt at styling. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his hands shook so badly he could barely hold his vows. Our 150 guests, all the important people in our lives, all the witnesses I'd need, sat in perfect silence, watching this beautiful disaster unfold. When Reverend Johnson asked for our vows, I pulled out a single index card. My hands weren't trembling from nerves, they were trembling from pure adrenaline, from the rush of justice finally being served. I looked Marcus dead in his panicked, bloodshot eyes and spoke clearly enough that every person in that historic museum could hear me. "Marcus, you told Sophia that our relationship was suffocating you. You said you needed her to talk to because I was too much to handle. So today, in front of everyone who loves us, I'm setting you free to breathe." The silence was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop on those polished marble floors. I let my microphone fall to the altar with a satisfying thud and walked back down that aisle like it was my personal runway. Camera flashes went off like fireworks as our photographer, bless her professional heart, captured every moment of my exit. Guests gasped and whispered, but I kept my chin high and my stride confident. The reception bill came to $89,000, every penny charged to the credit card in Marcus's name, just as we'd originally planned. The caterer, florist, DJ, and photographer all got paid in full for their beautiful work. 6 months later, I heard through mutual friends that Marcus was still drowning in debt from our spectacular non-wedding. Apparently, he's also still single. Turns out Sophia wasn't quite as interested in a long-distance relationship with a financially ruined man as she'd been in playing emotional support system to someone else's fiancé. As for me, I'm breathing just fine, thank you very much. And I finally learned what suffocating really means. It's when someone slowly strangles your self-worth while making you believe it's love. Marcus finally got his wish. He's completely free to breathe now. Too bad he's choking on the consequences.